welcome back to Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. Happy Monday. It's Monday, the 27th of May, Memorial Day in the USA, of course. Happy Memorial Day. Gosh, today Jeff is going to go into a little bit about the Naadi Astrology and how it shows our earthly experience, and it truly, truly does. And of course, Jeff has spoken in the past a lot about Mars crossing the eclipse point, and we're seeing the effect of it, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot more. So let's get started, Jeff.
Thank you for that. So Mars did cross the eclipse point yesterday, and notice we've had an increase over in Ukraine. Russia's been advancing. There's been a lot of back and forth. Ukraine is retaliating, and there's a lot of skirmishes. The big one is, look at Hamas launching all the rockets on Israel. Of course, they got stopped by the Iron Dome. Israel has retaliated back, knocking out a couple of commanders on Hamas. So we're seeing a lot of increase. And I also want to mention, we're hearing China's really amping up its energy around Taiwan. In fact, I heard a rumor today that there is a possibility and this is kind of secret from what I heard, but there may be a huge semiconductor investment being moved from Taiwan over to the United States. And maybe in the Arizona area from what I'm hearing, but it might be a $65 billion investment into moving Taiwan semiconductor, or a good portion of it, over here. So there's clearly a lot of saber rattling, a lot of things going on. And again, you can't 100% depend on the news because a lot of times it doesn't get reported, the true things that are going on. So this is very interesting what's happening right now. And also we got a third quarter moon coming up, which is again the final phase until we get our new moon. Now the third quarter moon's actually going to happen this Thursday, Pacific time at about 10:13 a.m. Of course, if you're on the East Coast, it's going to be about 1 o'clock, and wherever else you are in the world, extrapolate accordingly. And again, we're getting ready for the new moon, which is going to come up on June 6th, which is always a powerful reset. And the biggest thing I've been saying is all of this is happening in the background of the United States Pluto sidereal return, which the second one comes in July, which is exceedingly powerful. And then again, we've got that very powerful progression perfecting right in this September. So, and again, we're going to see the election fireworks get moving here. So we're just barely 6 months out, and we're going to see a lot of things get moving here. So interesting times. Also, I want to mention the weather. Look at the weather. If you look at very closely, a lot of the places that they're having such severe weather is almost exactly where that eclipse point is. So, it's really tough for those people. I mean, tornadoes and these storms, you got no warning. They come up so fast. I know I used to live in the Midwest, and I'll never forget in the 70s, I was working on the roof of a house, and we saw a storm blow up, and before we could get off the roof, I just watched the woods just get laid down with a tornado. We had to use a chainsaw to get home. We could not get out of the road to the main highway until we cut all the trees down. So these storms are really violent, and this relates a lot to the planetary alignment that I mentioned. Remember in last podcast, I talked about how in a heliocentric zodiac, we've actually got the opposition of the sun, Jupiter, and Uranus. So it was very, very powerful. This seems to be possibly settling down a little bit, but I know the internet's been quite wonky. Even the phone services have been pretty weird, and that's due to the severity of the solar flares. And this happens about every 12 years, but this particular alignment, I think, really exacerbated it. So powerful stuff. And again, we're seeing the effects in the weather. And again, with Mars crossing the eclipse point, we're seeing a lot of the current energies boil up even more. And a lot of crazy violence still going on across the United States in many different ways. There was just a gentleman shot last night. He was bartending, got out at 3:30 in the morning, and went to his car, and they were hacking out his catalytic converter, and they shot him. They shot him when he walked up and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" My son almost got killed by something like that a while back, where they were stealing catalytic converters and came out of a place, and they actually pulled guns on him and his friends. And thank God they didn't get shot like the poor guy did last night. So a lot of violence going on here. And let's hope it stays positive. So I also want to acknowledge what you said. It is Memorial Day, and it's always good to honor the veterans. These people gave their lives and defended a lot of hard situations. Could you imagine being on a farm and getting a letter in 1914 or in the 1940s and saying, you've got to go to war? And of course, that happened in many wars through Vietnam, Afghanistan, so on and so forth, even though the conscription wasn't, after the Vietnam War, but we still had a lot of people that have been told they got to go to war. And, that's a big sacrifice. And a lot of these poor people end up in tough shape from it. And so hats off to the veterans, because they certainly are defending this whole country. And it is a wonderful thing that they do. And I have to say, this is probably more important this year because of the Pluto return on the United States. I mean, we probably have our democracy, or you could say our constitutional republic, which is really what it is, under more attack now than it's ever been. So this is a really important year for the United States with this Pluto return going on. And let's hope for the very best that this country can turn around. As we see, the positive note is once we get through this Pluto return and these very difficult aspects that are coming up this year, we have Jupiter trining the United States sun in 2025, which is really positive. So we could be the phoenix rising out of the ashes. Let's hope.
Let's hope. Let's hope. I think we will be. I mean, you have to hope for that, but I think we will be. So let's talk a little bit. Let's go into the Naadi Astrology, Jeff. You've spoken about Nadi, I mean, endlessly, but specifically, it's true that it does show our earthly experiences here, each one being very individual, obviously, right? We're not talking about a bunch of Aries and a bunch of Pisces and Geminis. We're talking about us as individual souls having a physical experience.
Right. Right. And that's an interesting point, because I really believe that the celestial influences that we call astrology are an interaction on the soul and also on our consciousness. And what attracted me to not only just Naadi astrology, but this whole realm of spiritual, you could say, existence on the earth. Like, why are we here? And I think what answered that the most for me was not only Vedic astrology, but the branch called Nadi, which might be a much older branch, because it looks at astrology, I think, in a much more linear way to how it might be. And it's really saying that we're here having experience. And what's fascinating about this, and I want to put this book on the screen. This is an amazing book. It's called The Gateway of Understanding. And this, I've mentioned before many times, the book 30 Years Among the Dead by Dr. Carl Wicklund. And I've also mentioned a lot the Magus of Strovolos, which are some really favorite books of mine, and also the Sharar Hagilgam. Now, what's interesting about all of these books, and there's many others, and the Vedas as well, these books all point to one thing, that we are spirits having a physical experience. And what really caught my eye in studying the Naadi astrology is they literally state that first breath, when we are tied into the body, is literally the synchronization of time and karma. Now, that's profound when you think about that. I mean, it's really profound. What it means is that the soul is now knocked out in terms of its memory from where it's been, at least at this time, and we start fresh with a new earthly experience. And of course, we're spanked on the rear end in the delivery room or whatever else happens to us, right? And at that point, we grow and we start to mature, and we see little kids, how playful they are. Their little minds are really sharp, and they're uninhibited with any ego, with any programming, with any other things. They're like a clean slate coming in, though some have a lot of intuition. I've had so many parents where I've done their charts for their children, and they said, wow, this kid is really intuitive, and he's an old soul or she's an old soul. And it shows up in the chart, in the yogas, in the Nadi and Vedic astrology. It also shows up in the Western stuff too. The ancient traditional astrology is also really profound. But where I'm going with all this, and why I bring in Dr. Carl Wicklund, is because he was really chastised a lot because he didn't rail against religions, but he was pointing out maybe some of the flaws that certain religions left out. So there's a lot of great truths in religions. And what's interesting about this is that he talks about how he has interviewed so many disincarnate souls. And I really encourage people to read this book and not be offended in any way by his opinions, because he's really, in my opinion, a very interesting scientist. He quotes Albert Einstein and so many other philosophers and people who had come along who have objectively looked into this subject. And there's a real parallel here to the Naadi astrology, insofar as that we seem to be knocked out so that we have free will. And I've mentioned many times the great ages where we seem to have gone into the Iron Age, or other people call it the Dark Ages, between the 5th century and the 1700s. And now we're on an ascension back up over the next several thousand years to a golden age of peak. Now, this is interesting because when you look at time, there is no time. There's no time at all. Yes, there's time, and yes, we got to pay the bills every month, and yes, we look in the mirror and we get older every year. All that's true from the biological standpoint. But if you look at the research that Wicklund, also Daskalos, who's the Magus of Strovolos, and if you also look at like Dr. Fry, which she was amazing, and Dr. Edith Fiore, those are just some of the books I always mention. And why these books are so important is because you see a theme or a thread that seems to be consistent, and that is there's no time. Once we exit the body known as death, you could say consciousness that we leave with is kind of the one we hold for what we would call a period of time. And then miraculously, all of these psychiatrists, doctors, and regressionary therapists say that once they get a disincarnate soul to realize they can think themselves better, and they start opening their minds from the world programming that happened while they were in the body, they change. They start seeing things on the astral planes all around them. They may see relatives. They may see all these different things. So again, this isn't my opinion. This is the work that is profound by all these researchers. And I have found the same thing, that there are many souls who can become very nasty and very evil. And they're so ingrained with what they want on this physical plane, or so angry from what's been done to them. Again, I mentioned just a while back, I had an experience where someone came through to me who was deceased on the other side when an individual asked a question about his deceased father. And it was profound because I literally had to clear myself for hours afterwards, and it really hazed me over. And yet I got all this wonderful communications to where, he wanted to communicate to his sons that he was, loved them very much. And all these messages were coming through. And I know this wasn't my imagination because it really hit me emotionally. And I don't usually ever get channeling like that, or I don't ever directly encourage it because I'm not my personality type, and also my psyche. I like clearing and getting rid of things, but I've never had that come in on me that strong. And it's interesting because this person actually I had interaction with many years ago as a client. So a wonderful man too, I might add. And very interesting experience. And where I'm going with all this is when I do readings every day, I'm always seeing the profound karmic journey, or you could say soul journey, that seems to be indicated in the chart. Particularly the parents, the mother and the father, are big attributes in everyone's chart. And this is really profound stuff. And I encourage people to read this book with an open mind, that Wicklund, both 30 Years Among the Dead and also The Gateway of Understanding, because it's pretty profound. The information, this was written in 1934, so a long time ago. And again, this is a person who started out not believing anything whatsoever in spiritual work or disincarnate souls. He thought it was all bunk. He was totally a scientist. And you'll find if you read the Magus of Strovolos, he speaks very deeply about these psychonoetic dimensions, he calls them, which is really what we create when we exit these bodies. And many, even people who were, various religious practitioners said, wow, it's not quite the way we were taught. And I'm only trying to shed a light here. I'm not trying to, get into any dogma whatsoever of us becoming more aware of this. And this is the message that I found Wicklund communicated that was so important. And that is, if we could get more awareness of this while alive, we're likely to exit the body with more awareness on where we're going. So this is interesting stuff. I've had a lot of clients say to me, geez, I feel I've had walk-ins or so on and so forth. And again, this is supported where other souls join us or other spiritual entities join us throughout our lives. These are called Iburs and Maziks, and all this stuff is mentioned in the Sha'ar HaGilgam. So what's fascinating about all of this is time, like I always said, maybe God created so everything would happen at once. And there is no time except when we incarnate in this worldly existence, which is really astronomy. It's not even astrology as much as it is truly astronomy. And that's what the ancient astrology was. Quite profound.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you and I speak often about disincarnate souls trying to come in on us or others. And I was asking you the reason for that. It's and then we got to talking about how a lot of these souls want to come back. They want to come back and have this earthly experience again. Now, when we look at the astrology, in particular Naadi Astrology, can we see that in someone's chart that, yes, well, when you pass on, you will be coming back here?
They're often, yeah, it does show, and that's a very mysterious thing. I mean, any honest astrologer has to take and look at this very carefully before we make any hard, fast rules. But I would say that generally, planets that are more difficult and combinations mean that there's something playing itself out karmically. And like I often see, the big one out there is called a Kalasarpa Yoga. Kalasarpa Yogas is when all the planets are in between the moon's nodes, known as Rahu and Ketu. And there's no two alike. I've never seen two Kalasarpa Yogas alike yet. And yet it's an indication that that particular incarnation is a real pivot point with free will. And there's a lot of indications as to when the soul might attain moksha. Sometimes it's indicated by the moon's placement if it's in the right configuration, particularly in the 12th house. Not always, but that could certainly be one major indicator. And K2 is always what we call the liberator. It is the escape from the movie theater, if you will. I always call it the back exit. And K2 is what they call the gateway to moksha, which is the moon's south eclipse point or south node. So yeah, there's a lot of indicators. What you have to be careful of doing this astrology is, and I'm very careful of this, is not to become dogmatic in your interpretations, because there's no two charts exactly the same, which is quite fascinating. Every chart is literally a karmic puzzle. And I think truly only the angels have the full answers behind that. But boy, you can certainly see the cycles going on when the ebbs and the flows happen throughout the life. And invariably, you can see when that soul is likely to exit, particularly when there's hard aspects between Ketu, which is, again, the liberator of karma, and Saturn, which is the planet of karma. In fact, invariably, I see when Ketu and Saturn and Jupiter in the north node called Rahu are in hard aspects, and that's usually, and Mars is in there, that's usually a time when the soul could exit the body. And my mother, she died at 47 years old, and she had the exact same configurations. It was textbook. And so many others. We saw your sister, so many others. I just had a brother pass away not too long ago, same configuration. And I've seen it time and time and time and time again. And there's no two exactly alike on that either. But clearly, we are in a soul matrix where we come to this physical plane, I think, to play out our physical and our karmic desires, as well as our, you could say, experience of the earthly plane, because Earth is also a profound place. I mean, when you look at it, it is the place where creation is clearly happening. Look at all the human life, the plant life, the animal life, the mineral life. It's stunning, stunning, stunning. This is a divine place of creation. And that's what many of these researchers have found. There's myriads and myriads and myriads of angels and experiences. And I think there's a ton of extraterrestrial stuff going on this planet. And it's just not fully publicly acknowledged. I heard a great story yesterday about how a woman was working, her mother was working for Howard Hughes, and she was taken on an elevator a mile below the Earth's surface, and profound. And there was all kinds of extraterrestrial interaction down there. And that's not the first time I've heard stories like that. So profound stuff. This little planet has a lot going on, that's for sure.
That's for sure. That's for sure. I'm still waiting to see my first UFO. I know you've seen many. We have to go, out late at night to specific places. I'm still waiting. I know it all exists. That's for sure. But I'm actually looking forward to witnessing that.
Yeah, it's a profound thing. Yeah, I've seen more than my share of them. It's absolutely profound. And even my grandmother back in the early 1900s, she said there was this huge ball of fire. It was sparkling, and it went right through the farmhouse. This is like 1918 to 1920, something like that. So this is nothing new. People have been talking about UFOs, or you could say extraterrestrial life. The Egyptians talked about it. The Vedas talked about it. It's all over the world. Profound, profound stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So just one thing, I just want to rewind for a second and ask about Wickland's thoughts on disincarnate souls trying to come back to Earth. I know something like that happened through his wife, right? Am I correct in saying
That's
that?
right. She did a lot of the channeling, and he also used something known as a Windham generator. Now, many people know that today as shock therapy treatment, which, believe it or not, dislodges the disincarnate soul, meaning the soul attached to a living person parasitically. And this is deep stuff because, again, I always mention the book by Rabbi Yehuda, which is called Menot Yehuda, or Rabbi Fateh, I should say, a profound book of the story after story after story of people who were attached to other people, trying to escape some of the angelic forces, getting them to purify and move on. So there's stuff going on here far, far deeper than just the astrology and just the experience. There's clearly karmic energies that are connected to our soul roots that cause us to keep reincarnating. And I got to tell you, revenge and anger and hatred seem to be very binding forces. And they actually talk about how the evil spirits actually play off that energy. That's also mentioned in the Sha'ar HaGilgam. They love the anger, they love the hate, they love the revenge, the wars. They actually play off that psychic energy, and that actually keeps souls trapped here a lot longer. So
isn't that interesting? And all of those things, the anger, the hatred, create disease as well in our bodies, right? And I know that evil energy loves that. It loves to have that.
It does. It does. And then you get right out into the demonic stuff, which is, really hideous. And of course, we hear a lot of the stories of horrible things going on this planet, the child trafficking, some of the hideous stuff that we hear connected with that. And you wonder, how could this ever happen? And I can tell you it is possession, and it also seems to be attraction and resonances with the karmic elementals that the soul has collected. And there's a lot of great texts. The Rosicrucians have come out, the Kabbalists have come out, the rabbis, the Vedantic stuff. And again, I like Carl Wickland's work because he really was coming from a scientific background. And he quotes many scientists in these books. And the amount of souls that he had interaction with, that one book, 30 Years Among the Dead, is a treasure trove. It's a treasure trove of people coming back. Even Blavatsky, if people remember her, she's created the whole theosophical movements, went over to India. She was with Ledbetter, all that. That was the whole spiritual movements in the 1800s, which was connected to the Golden Dawn and many secret societies during that time. And she came back and said, wow, it's not the way we thought it was. And this is being communicated through Carl Wickland's wife, the channel. So this is profound stuff. And, what's, I think, valuable about rereading this stuff, it doesn't matter what time era we're in, because the soul seems to be timeless. And these truths come through from these disincarnate souls that are quite profound. And it's some amazing research. And, again, I have experienced a lot of stuff connected with this. And I find many things connected with drug abuse and suicides and murders create a lot of emotion, as you would expect that they would. And people really want, some kind of a resolution to that, or revenge. And these are very binding forces to this physical plane. And not to make the earth out like it's supposedly some bad place. It also is a great place of experience. I mean, look at a little child when they skip and happy down the road. They're just amazing. They're the most blessed things you can imagine. Even a little animal, they're the same way. They're just so happy, so full of life. And we lose that the more we get older, and then the ego starts hardening, and it's all reaction. It's very interesting stuff. And what I talk about all this stuff for is because I think when we read this, any human being with average intelligence or above is going to see really quickly that it's really up to us to do the research so that we exit these bodies with a more conscious awareness of who we are. We're really spiritual beings having a physical experience. And this is exactly what many of the stories, not only in the Bible, but also in the Upanishads and many other of these researchers have found. Dr. Fry found amazing stuff, like there was legion that would actually be attached to the soul and the psyche, helping it change or move to the better. This is deep stuff. These are profound books with a lot of very valuable information to us as spiritual beings having these physical experiences. So it's profound stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love how the astrology, the ancient astrology brings us to talk about all of this.
It does.
It's just beautiful. It's really beautiful. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for this. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a beautiful, beautiful, healthy, safe, and magical week ahead. We'll see you next time on Astrology Today with Jeff Harman.